Now, the New Development Bank has announced that it will stop doing business with Russia. In a statement, the bank said, in light of unfolding uncertainties and restrictions, it has put new transactions in Russia on hold. Here to talk to us about the impact of this, I'm joined by Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Dr. Azar Jammine. Dr. Jammine, good evening and thank you very much for your time. The BRICS Bank set up really by countries within the BRICS bloc who are saying we want to help ourselves. We want a self-help institution that is not attached, for example, to the likes of the IMF. In fact, it was established back in 2014, immediately after the IMF backed the Ukraine. Well, are you surprised by this move by the Development Bank, and does it indicate anything?
Well, on the face of it, it does seem surprising. Unfortunately, the information is fairly scant, but one would have thought that with Russia being one of the 5 BRICS countries, the BRICS Bank the last thing you would have expected was for them to halt dealings with Russia. But I think it goes a little further than that. In the statement, they say absolutely nothing about the war with Ukraine. They just mention the notion of uncertainties, and that I think can be seen to reflect reluctance on the part of a bank, according to its institutional characteristics, to lend money to someone where they are not sure that they will get their money back again.
Yeah.
And I think that is the main reason why they are halting dealings.
How are these uncertainties and restrictions going to impact on the money already being given to Russia? 4.8 billion in US dollar. Those are the Russian projects that are currently with the BRICS Bank. Will they be affected at all?
Well, $4.8 billion in the broader scheme of things is not a lot of money for Russia. That money has already been advanced. I suppose that money, having been advanced, the money is not going to be called back again. I suspect it's for any new deals with Russia and Russian banks that they will basically put a halt for the moment. But I think it's more to do with the fact that banks are subject to certain constraints, official fiduciary and constraints, and certain governance rules. And it's in line with those rules that they are not allowed to lend. You've got to bear in mind that Russia, for example, was downgraded by international, admittedly Western credit ratings agencies last week to CCC-. That's about almost as low as you can go on a credit rating scale, which suggests that it's a signal from the ratings agencies that anyone who lends to Russia now is unlikely to get his money back. And is unlikely to get his money back not because Russia is unduly indebted, but simply because all the sanctions that have been imposed make it impossible for one to get that money back physically. The ban on SWIFT financial transactions means you can't get your money to and from Russia any longer. So that is the real constraint.
Yeah. As previously, thought of as Russia was taking the money, not necessarily because they needed the money from the BRICS Bank as opposed to South Africa. But as you mentioned now, with their credit rating significantly having been downgraded and affected, would they need this money at all?
In the short term, they don't need the money, probably. Russia has been blessed with massive reserves. Its government debt to GDP ratio is not particularly high. It's been reaping huge amounts of foreign exchange inflows from all its resources, including oil, but also, platinum group metals, coal, all sorts of things that Russia produces over the years. And its economy hasn't grown that fast. It's been one of the laggards in the world economy. So it's been earning a lot of foreign exchange, but its imports have not been surging ahead for over the years. So it's been able to accumulate a lot of reserves. So it doesn't need this extra money. The advantage of getting a BRICS Bank loan, as is the case with South Africa also hasn't really desperately needed to borrow from BRICS. The advantage has been that the loans are issued at an interest rate of 1 or 2%, because that is what dollar interest rates are running at. Whereas in Russia and South Africa, long-term interest rates are 5, 10 times that level. So yeah, for the Russians or for the South Africans to borrow money in their own currency, it costs an awful lot of money, and that's why it's useful to have some cheaper loans through the BRICS bank than to borrow domestically.
Yeah. Except for the cheaper loans, of course, the bigger politics of it was this sense that the BRICS bank would somewhat dilute Western influence, financial institutions, that is, and stop countries like South Africa and Russia from going to the likes of the IMF to borrow money. Has the institution been that successful?
Well, from that point of view, obviously, the institution has not entirely achieved its goal. But, I mean, it was set up not only to lend money to the 5 incumbents of the BRICS Bank, but to many other developing countries. And it's probably in that sense also, I didn't mention that why they may have halted dealings with Russia is because many of those countries to whom they would like to lend or have been lending money have probably severed relations or with Russia, or voted against the invasion of the Ukraine. And so the BRICS Bank is trying to play a very orderly and honest role in this regard.
Yeah.
But you're quite right, they have not, the reliance is still very heavily on Western banks.
Back in 2014, the IMF approved a giant rescue package for the Ukraine. Are we likely to see anything of that nature coming from the BRICS Bank towards Russia?
I think, I don't know whether it will come from the IMF or from individual countries themselves, but once this war is over, depending on the state, I mean, obviously if the Ukraine is completely occupied by Russia, there will be very little, I don't think that there will be much assistance to try and, it depends on the outcome of the war. But if Ukraine were to win the war or Russia were to pull back, I think you would see an incredible amount of assistance actually being forthcoming, much in the way that Germany was helped out after the Second World War to recover.
Yeah. Would Russia, if it wins this war, be able to come and knock at the doors of the New Development Bank for some rescue package money?
That's a very good question. And I really don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know enough about the workings of the BRICS Bank to determine whether or not Russia would be entitled to do that. But presumably, if, all 5, the other 4 countries involved in BRICS all abstained from voting against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including South Africa. And probably that was geared towards trying to maintain a semblance of unity and cohesion that would enable them to assist Russia after the war, after a war were to take place.
Yeah. Speaking of these other partners, I mean, South Africa, the last time I looked, had about 25.5 billion rands in the bank or so. Do you think they were at all consulted in this decision to hold future projects? Did they back it? It would certainly be an awkward position for them, because in the country they've obviously taken this neutral stance. And the bank, however you look at it, the statement, yes, is very scant, is very generic, but nonetheless it's an action to not continue to hold future projects. Yes,
one suspects that that is the case. One needs to also bear in mind South Africa, that 25.5 billion rand, it's just under $2 billion. That was its share of the creation of the BRICS Bank originally. But that's, each country, each of those 5 countries contributed towards the equity of the BRICS Bank in proportion to its size, I think it was GDP, but it could have been reserves. So that China was by far the biggest contributor towards the formation of the BRICS Bank, followed by Russia, followed by India, followed by Brazil and South Africa, a fairly small portion of that total. So just to put that into perspective.
Dr. Azar Jammine, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. That's Dr. Azar Jammine, Director at Econometrix.